I'm going to talk about the Statsig MCP server. And I'm going to be able to give some like practical experience stuff from deploying an MCP server in, I would say, like a much less regulated and scrappy and perhaps less security aware way than Harish's implementation. You should still use my MCP server. I promise it's good, but very different, very different. So you'll see two sides of the coin, I think, here. First off, who knows what Statsig does? Does anyone, can you raise your hand if you do? Okay. Can you keep your hand up if you've used Statsig? Tough, okay. We got work to do. So Statsig is a A/B testing and experimentation platform, plus feature flagging and analytics all in one platform. The goal is, and a lot of people use our product these days with their data warehouse. You can run experiments right on top of your data warehouse. I'll get a little bit more into like why I'm explaining that and how you use our MCP with that in a couple minutes, but I just wanted to set that context. Okay, now I'm gonna take the risk here of not showing that demo and try to do a live one. Okay, you see that okay? All right, so let's pretend that you run like an e-commerce website or something like that. And on your website, you run A/B tests. You like change your headline, you do things like that, and you do a lot of that in Cursor. Well, what you can do is, you probably expect what's gonna happen. You can just query all your experiments that are running straight from Cursor, and it'll use the Statsig MCP to give you information about what's going on. So some of these are actually running and have like more interesting things going on, and then you could drill into the next one. And so in Cursor, you don't have to leave, go to the Statsig console, look at your results. You can just stay there and say like, hey, I shipped this new button last week. Is it working? Should I like roll that back right now? Should I change the code? Okay. Back to my slides. So here's what I'm going to cover today. I'd like to cover some of the learnings that our team had from shipping the MCP server. I've been lucky to be along for the ride the whole time that we've shipped this and do some of the development work on it. We learned some interesting things that I'd like to share. I think they can be very practical and they could be helpful. I'd like to talk about our vision for why the Statsig MCP server is useful as well. I think it's something compelling and it could be helpful to some of you if you're thinking about building an MCP server. And then lastly, I'll talk about the MCP server and how you can use it if you're interested in doing that. Sound good? Cool. All right, so I've been thinking of the Statsig MCP server's development in 3 phases. I feel like our MCP server started how everyone's MCP server starts, which is like a hackathon project that gets rolled on top of a REST API. Like you already had a REST API that did something and you just like turn it into an MCP server. That's exactly what we did. It was super ugly. Like I don't think I would have encouraged our customers to use it because it's like, you know, it was rolled in its own GitHub project and it was like git clone, install, build, and then like copy a big JSON, whatever. But it worked. And it also built up excitement internally about what MCP can do at Statsig, which I think was like a victory. And so I'd still encourage folks to start here if you're interested in that. The next phase is we went ahead and hosted our MCP server, right? So we moved it from just being in that GitHub repository to actually being on Statsig's infrastructure. And then you could, you know, we could give you that sort of standard MCP config with the streamable HTTP URL, and you could just copy it and get started. You didn't have to do anything. That was great, and customers started using it, which was awesome. But there were still a lot of issues because it was still just wrapped around a classic REST API, right? Like it was wrapped around an open API spec. I'm not saying everyone will end up in this state, but I think a lot of people building an MCP will end up in this state where this is like the logical path. And then the third thing we had to do to make it, like I think our MCP is in a good place now, not quite as hardened as the Credit Karma one, but is in a good place now, is we had to make it essentially ready for humans, is the way I think about this. just having an MCP server where all of the tool names are like v1 get list dynamic config, where it's essentially coming off of an API route, was an okay starting place. But it's when you think about like LLMs and how they interpret things, like they're trained on human text, right? So if you can write things in your MCP server that a human would understand, I think that's much closer to what an LLM will understand than like what like you would actually write in a curl on the command line. So we changed all the names to things like create dynamic config, completely update dynamic config, like descriptive names and really good descriptions as well, plus like all the proper parameters and such. We also did something cool where we actually hosted the configuration. So we can now like edit this on the fly really easily, and I'll talk a little bit about how we did that too. And this is a really interesting process because we learned about the MCP spec as we went through this, right? And like we saw what worked, what didn't, and we like just took a whole bunch of customer feedback and we landed on the right-hand side of this page. I think a lot of people end up like that, but like maybe you can short circuit one or two of these steps with this knowledge now. And now the Madrona folks showed like a list of usage of MCP servers. I think we might have made the list. We would be close. We'd be at the bottom for sure, but we might have made the list if they had data on Statsig. So people are actually using this MCP server now, which is fun and exciting. I wanted to share a few things that we learned through those 3 steps. The first one I already sort of covered, which was to build for humans. There can be a lot of convenience in just building MCP servers out of what you already have. I think that's a good starting point, but much better is actually like, think about if a human is reading this spec, what would they be able to read, and would they know which tools to use when? I think that that's like a good litmus test. And there's a bunch of like emerging open source packages for changing open API specs into MCPs. I think those are awesome, and I do think you should use them. I would recommend them. But I don't think you should just use them and then not apply any abstraction or layer of definition on top of them. I think that that's a mistake we made early. Another tool that we used that I wanted to call out is if you just do that, where you just like do open API to MCP, you're going to have everything in your API available in your MCP. We did that at first, and it just like overwhelmed the context size of a lot of LLMs. And like it would work with Claude 4, but it wouldn't work with GPT-4o, which had like a smaller context window and stuff like that. So that was a mistake we made, where what we ended up doing is creating a remote configuration file that said, these are all the APIs that people are actually using, keep those in the MCP server. And this is like an incredibly nice segue for me to plug our product a little bit, because we used our product to do this, where we have this tool in Statsig called dynamic configs. It's just like remotely hosted JSON, basically. And we use this remotely hosted JSON to like define what all the tools were, all the allowed parameters were, et cetera. And so like now a customer will come to me and say like, hey, you have this endpoint for experiments, but you don't have it for feature gates or feature flags. Can you add that? And that's like a 10-second task for like any developer on our team, which is a really nice quality of life change. So I would highly recommend, and like whatever, don't use Statsig, use anyone's, but like some kind of remote configuration I think can be incredibly helpful with MCPs, hosted MCPs. The last couple things, debugging tooling has, I think, moved ahead leaps and bounds. We actually built our own debugging tooling at first because none existed, which was like we hand-rolled a Python script that had like basically an MCP client in it, and we were using that to be like, oh, why is our MCP server overwhelming the context of GPT-4o? Oh, it's like 90,000 tokens of parameters. Like, that's way too many, right? It's actually hard to discover those things unless you build something like this at first. But now, and Katie was talking about it, but the MCP maintainers actually released an inspector that I've only played with a bit, but seems awesome so far. So I'd highly recommend using that. And then the last thing I wanted to land is, at first we didn't test our MCP at all, right? We just like, and it makes sense, like we were just scraping something together. Once we're like, okay, customers are using this, we need to add testing, it was actually shockingly easy, right? Because you're implementing one side of a spec just like implement the other side and like write some tool calls in the other side of the MCP spec against your server. And that's just integration tests, more or less. It's not unit tests, but like it's really, really robust and actually very easy testing. Yeah. So that's most of what I wanted to talk about that we actually learned in our server, building our server. Any questions before I go on to a bit more actually like about the server, how it works? Okay. I want to talk about the motivation for making a server for us, and I think this could inspire some of you as well. Dario had this quote, right? He said, I think we'll be there in 3 to 6 months where AI is writing 90% of the code, blah, 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 and then he said he'd write more and more of it. This like got a ton of traffic. This was about 6 months ago. I do think that AI is writing a lot of code, right? And sorry, one more slide. That's like us reacting to this at Statsig. Anthropic's one of our customers, and we're like, oh, AI agents can't create gates and experiments yet. Like, that sounds really bad for us. So this actually, I think, is like, if you're a dev tools company, or you're expecting developers to use your product, having an MCP server feels to me like a strategic imperative. And like, write this down and go like tell whoever can give you an engineer to work on this or something. But like this, in our minds, was like, if we don't move fast with this and move with our customers, then like they're gonna stop using our product. Their usage is gonna decrease, et cetera, right? But like, there's all these best practices in coding, and these are things that like we work on intimately at Statsig, like slowly rolling out your changes, having telemetry around your code, running experiments and A/B tests, like that's our bit, right? But I kind of refuse to believe that like we're gonna throw those things out when AI starts writing code. Like, I definitely think there could be changes or it could slow down, et cetera. But I don't think that the powers that be are gonna accept that we like stop running experiments and things like that. So it was more around like, how do we figure out a way to weasel our way into the new processes, right? Like, make sure we're sticking with our customers in continuing to do these things when 100% of code is written with AI. That was the motivation for making a Statsig MCP. And this is sort of like how we think of the use cases for actually using the Statsig MCP. So like I said, our product is around adding telemetry to your code, adding feature flags, feature gates to your code so you can roll things out, roll them back, only target them to certain populations, and then also doing A/B tests, which is where like you're running a formal experiment. We think this thing will do better. We want to test it. That's been our flagship product for a long time. OpenAI, New York Times, like I said, that's the main thing they use with us. We think that Statsig, because of the data in Statsig, but also those features, it should stick with you through the full feature development lifecycle, and this MCP just supports that. So let's say you want to do brainstorming, and I have a good example here. Let's say you want to do brainstorming. The Statsig MCP can help you. It can look at your past experiments, what works. It can help suggest ones that could work next. Instrumentation. It can help create events and metrics in your code so that they're ready to track for experiments. Checking status. You're running an experiment, right? And you just want to say like, hey, I'm running this experiment. Like, is my revenue falling off a cliff? You can check that in line, in Cursor, in ChatGPT, whatever your client of choice is that you're using MCPs with. And then the last one is code cleanup. So if you have used like feature flags, feature gates before, or experiments, you end up in this state where you'll like launch a feature and the code will just stick around, right? That like previously was gating the feature. MCP makes that, like that's a trivial code change, but you have to put the PR up, et cetera. MCP makes that trivial, where it can do all that for you. It can do the code change. If you use the right kind of tool, something like Devin that can actually put up the PR, then it can basically do the end-to-end flow for you. Okay, I'm gonna do some examples now. Okay, so brainstorming. And this one is, we're excited, our MCP server is about to start working with ChatGPT. There's a bunch of stuff we had to do to make that work, but we're pretty close now. Let's say you want to brainstorm, and this example is an example project you'll see us use a lot at Statsig of like, you run an e-commerce website for your cafe. I'm asking it to help me brainstorm new Statsig experiment ideas. It's using the tools to retrieve previous experiments, and it's coming up with new ones. So here it's going to say, like, oh, you need to try lazy loading your menu. You need to run like a new experiment on your pastries that you're offering, your pastry deals, etc. So that's one, brainstorming. Okay, next, auto add gates and logging. I'm going to do the risky thing again and try to actually demo this one. Okay, so one sec. I've got the Statsig website running locally here, the one-stop data platform for product development. That's what the Statsig website looks like. And I've got a change here that I'm going to ask Cursor to make. And if I go to my MCP settings, sorry, oops. You'll see that I actually have a Cursor rule written that tells Cursor to always use a Statsig feature gate when it ships changes, right? So you can imagine, like, you're telling Cursor to make all these new features in your code. And it's just like willy-nilly adding code everywhere. It'd be really nice if you had a way you could turn on and turn off the things that it was doing. That's one thing that the Statsig MCP makes really easy, is have it put a feature gate around everything. Let's go ahead and I'll run this. All right. I think it'll run on its own. Yeah, it's creating a gate. See, I didn't tell it to create a gate. It just says in the rules to create a gate. Oh, got something wrong. Nice. Looks good. And then I think it's going to make a change right here. Hey, nice. So there you go. Ship your winners, kill your losers. Let's see if it actually made that change. Oh, so tough. So tough. You guys get the idea. Basically what's happening here is it has done statsig.checkGate. Hopefully you can see that in the code a little bit, where it's actually wrapping that new header in a feature gate. So then once that, and like I assume there's something wrong with the code that Cursor wrote, not with the Statsig side, but you would actually be able to turn on and turn off in the console which headline you're seeing. So you want to test something, you want Cursor to like iterate really fast, but like you don't want to have the risk. You want to roll things back when the AI writes terrible code. That's one way to do it. Okay, and one more example. Sorry, I got to rip through this one. Checking status we already talked about. Yeah, and then the last one I wanted to talk about was gate removal. So you ask the whatever LLM client you're using to actually remove the gates that are stale, and it'll go ahead. It can use the MCP to query like, hey, what gates are stale? And what should they actually return? Like, should that return true or false? Is that feature turned on? And it can do that after that. And so that's the four sort of things that we've been seeing folks use Statsig MCP with. And like I said, there's sort of two things here. Like one, this is really useful today, right? Like we have customers, like I said, I think we have like thousands of queries a week now and hundreds of customers. People are using this to just make creating experiments, creating gates, adding telemetry easier and more part of their workflows. But it's also, and like it might be for many of you, it's a strategic imperative to keep up with modern workflows like AI workflows. Yeah, that's all I have. If you'd like to try the Statsig MCP, here's a QR code, or you can just find it on our docs, docs.statsig.com/MCP. Thank you so much.